getting in. Okay. Excellent. Oh, it's so good to see so many of you. Thanks for coming.
And now we are live and being recorded.
Great. Good morning, everyone. Senator Mary Washington here with Delegate Sandy Rosenberg. We are chairs of the AELR committee. For those who are watching, this is a special joint committee of the Maryland legislature to review regulation. It is not similar. It is not conducting like our committee hearings. We not passing laws here. The intent of the AELR committee is to have an opportunity for the executive, the legislature, and agencies to and to ensure that regulations are consistent with legislation. When there are regulations, when one of the members of the committee believes that we need to hear more, or that we're unsure that the regulation is consistent with legislative intent, any member may call for a hearing. And one of our members, Delegate Jay Jacobs, has called for a meeting on the emergency regulations DLS control number 23-31. And so what will happen is that we will have an opportunity to hear from Delegate Jacobs, and I believe he has some people he wants to provide us with information. And then we will also hear from others. We have 3 witnesses who have signed up who are concerned about the regulations. And again, we don't have an authority to amend regulation. Regulation was in is a separate document. It is created by agencies. We are advisors and collaborators in this process. My co-chair, Sandy Rosenberg, I'm sure you have some opening remarks, and then we will get to the public hearing.
Certainly. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. This is part of a constitutionally affected process. We can, our approval is needed for emergency regulations. For otherwise regulations, there is a process of dialogue between the 2 distinct bodies, the branches, the legislature and the executive branch. In this instance, since Delegate Jacobs requested a hearing, we're very pleased to respond. And I think we will begin with the department. We'll speak first to these regulations. And whoever is here from the department to begin that testimony, you are recognized.
Good morning. Thank you very much. Good morning, Chair Rosenberg and Chair Washington, members of the committee, and everyone else that has joined to be a part of today's hearing. On behalf of Secretary Kurtz, I am Assistant Secretary for Aquatic Resources at Maryland Department of Natural Resources, Kristen Fiddler, and I should be joined by my Director of Fisheries, Lynn Fagley, and our Associate Director, Mike Luisi, if they haven't been let in from the waiting room. I think maybe they are still there. But I'm happy to okay, it looks like they're coming in now. Great. And I have one slide to share just to have a visual up. I thought that might be helpful in sort of distilling down exactly what we're talking about for decision today. Would that be okay for me to share my screen?
Certainly.
Okay. All right. So bear with me one moment. I will. Okay, hang on one second. I might not.
And while she's getting ready to do that, I know I read the control number, but this is about like that. So just wanted to make sure people understood the topic area. Are you ready? And the regulation is to extend the prohibition on fishing of striped bass by a 1 month. Okay, so are you ready, Ms. Fiddler? We can see your.
Yes, Chair Washington, do you see a slide on the screen that you do?
Yes.
Okay, fantastic. Great. Thank you so much. I'll go ahead and get started. So again, good morning, everyone that's here. I want to thank you for taking the time to be a part of this hearing. The department takes our role as stewards of our natural resources incredibly seriously. This action was proposed in late November based on new data that was received and we believed was important to implement for this upcoming striped bass season. So that's the impetus for the emergency nature of the regulations was simply the timing of process in order to get these in place by May of this year. So we recognize that the striped bass species as a fishery, as Maryland state fish, and as an incredibly important recreational and commercial fishery, generates a lot of emotion and passion and strong support from various stakeholders throughout the state. I believe we all share a common goal that we want to protect the striped bass and ensure that it's a sustainable and thriving fishery moving forward. So I'm going to try to keep it relatively brief because I imagine there will be a lot of questions and then others that want to speak on the regulations. So what you have before you today are fairly narrowly tailored and straightforward updates to our current regulations. Again, I mentioned that they're emergency in nature so that we could reach this 2024 season following information that we received in late October. Any further changes beyond the 2024 season, or even just to make these changes permanent, would require a full proposal promulgating rule package that would allow for much more extensive public comment and review. So DNR officials believe it is critical to take measures right now to protect the adult spawning stock of striped bass by reducing fishing mortality associated with harvest, along with fish that die after they are caught and released. So these emergency regulations are intended to protect the fish when they are most vulnerable during their critical spawning period, which our data demonstrates goes into the first half of the month of May. So with more protections in place, the expectation is that there will be more spawning stock that is unimpacted by our interference, our interaction with them, which will then enhance the odds of successful spawning when those environmental conditions are right. So just a little bit of background, Maryland waters serve as the spawning grounds for about 70% of the striped bass that migrate up and down the East Coast. And like I mentioned earlier, we take our leadership role here in the Chesapeake Bay, managing that overall population very seriously. And as you all well know, striped bass is Maryland's state fish and the most important commercial and recreational fish species. So striped bass spawning activity is highly temperature driven. It is water temperature based. And historically, adult fish have migrated to the Chesapeake Bay. So they come in from the ocean, from the coast, and move up into the freshwater tributaries of the bay to spawn. They stage first. They're in their spawning stage, say in March, and they spawn in April and into May, which also historically has aligned with the seasonal arrival of zooplankton and other microscopic food sources that those larval striped bass eat. So that's a really important piece too, that those timing windows are aligned so that there is reproductive success for the larval fish. So where are we today and why did we propose the emergency regulations in late November? So in October, the Maryland Department of Natural Resources announced the results of last year's juvenile striped bass survey, which tracks the reproductive success of striped bass in the Chesapeake Bay. The 2023 Young of Year index was 1.0, which is well below the long-term average of 11.1. So we absolutely recognize that additional conservation measures, protections for those spawning female fish are necessary, and they're necessary now. So just a little bit of information about the survey. During that annual survey, our fishery managers examined 22 sites located in 4 major striped bass spawning areas. So we're talking about the Choptank, the Nanticoke and Potomac Rivers, and the Upper Chesapeake Bay. Biologists visit each site 3 times per summer, collecting fish with 2 sweeps of 100-foot beach seine nets. And the index represents the average number of recently hatched striped bass captured in each sample. And I will note that, as you know, again, on behalf of Secretary Kurtz and the Moore-Miller administration, we are absolutely committed to making fishery management decisions based on the absolute best data and science available. And Maryland's juvenile index is one of the best data sources available anywhere. And so we're grateful for the tools that we have in place to give us the information that we currently do have. So with that, you know, startling information from the Young of Year survey in October, it also represented the 5th year in a row, the 5th consecutive year of a low juvenile index result. So that brings us to the actual proposal language, which you can see summarized on this slide on the screen. So the first conservation measure we are proposing, the first of 2, is to extend the month-long closure. So we're already closed for harvest and targeting in the bay for the month of April. So we propose extending that April closure for an additional 2 weeks into May. So May 1st through May 15th. That would be a new closure. What that does is it eliminates our trophy season, which historically has been targeting really large fish, so 35 inches and larger. And we know that in the first half of May, 20% to 30% of female striped bass are still spawning. And for those that have already spawned, they are making their way out to the coast. And we want to protect the 20 to 30% that are still spawning, as well as those that just spawned and are making their way to the coast. And they can successfully be part of the spawning stock biomass. So we feel that this additional 2-week closure is a critical conservation measure that should be adopted this season. And we hope that it will help inform additional measures and protections that could be on the horizon as well. So that's one proposed change. The second proposed change is to extend the closure to harvest that's currently in place on the Susquehanna Flats. It's a 6-week closure from April 1st to May 15th. The Susquehanna Flats is an area where many adult striped bass end their journey from the Atlantic Ocean to spawn. So we propose extending that 6-week closure, again, just for an additional 2 weeks into May to give that full protection to the spawning females. And we've added no targeting for that 2-week period as well. And no targeting is the catch and release and catch and keep. So we're recognizing that, you know, we want to make sure that we're not harvesting the spawning females, but we also don't want to interfere and impact them by catching them, bringing them up out of the water and putting them back in. It's too vulnerable of a time. And our science and data and our management feel strongly that leave those fish alone for those 2 weeks to give them the best chance to spawn successfully, and for the larval, you know, fish to also be successful. So in conclusion, the emergency regulations are intended to protect the fish when they are the most vulnerable during their critical spawning period. We recognize and appreciate that all sectors of the striped bass fishery will need to work together to preserve the spawning stock for the future of this important recreational and commercial fishery along not just Maryland's portion of the Chesapeake Bay, but up and down the Atlantic coast. The recent recruitment numbers of juvenile striped bass show that additional management and conservation efforts are absolutely necessary to protect the overall population. We believe that these 2 narrowly tailored, straightforward regulations for the 2024 season will help protect the spawning stock, and by increasing the spawning stock will enhance the odds of successful spawning when environmental conditions are right. So I will close there, and I'm happy to take any questions. And I also, you let me know if you'd like me to take the slide down or keep it up. I believe you're on mute, Chair Washington.
Chair Rosenberg, do you have any follow-up questions? I know questions. If any members have questions, please raise your hand. This is an opportunity for us to better understand. I'm looking. Okay. So I have a question. Can you explain some of what we heard was that you should consider allowing catch and release instead of the fishing ban for the next 2 weeks. I understand that there's some mortality issues related to catch and release, but can you explain, why we're choosing to extend it 2 weeks and not catch and release?
Sure, I will take a stab at that, and then if Lynn, our Director of Fisheries, is online, she can fact check me or add some additional detail. But yes, we recognize that there is some data out there that shows there's limited impacts or risk of mortality from catch and release in the first 2 weeks or in May. Just given the environmental conditions, water and air temperature. However, because our data shows that there are absolutely still spawning females in May, 20 to 30% of them, we feel strongly that in an abundance of caution, and especially at this inflection point where we are, given that we've had 5 consecutive years of poor reproduction, and the fishery itself, the population is on a decline, that it is imperative that we take these conservation and protection measures just for 2 weeks in May to give all of the female spawning fish every best possible chance for success and for survival. And so while the risk may be low, we believe it is offset by the importance of the conservation benefits. And I see that Lynn has her hand up, so please chime in, Lynn.
Ms. Begley, are you able to further elaborate?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. And I apologize for not being on camera. I've got a very wobbly connection. I just wanted to further elaborate that we are seeing some research coming in that shows that the stress of fighting a fish can actually, if that fish has not yet spawned, it can actually impact the health and the viability of her offspring because of the stress that she incurs being fought on a hook and line. And I also want to say that if the fish has already spawned, that interaction is still going to be quite stressful, and there could be sublethal impacts. And the striped bass spawning stock, the population is now classified as overfished. And those are the fish that are trying to get back to the ocean to join that coastal spawning stock. So as Kristen said, we're trying to just bolster every protection we can during this time. Thank you.
And then I have one last question. Again, it's based on what the chair and I have heard and what we've read as a part of the comment period. Has the department, do you have a sense of the economic impact of closing what's being called trophy season? And I understand these regulations are currently under recreational fishing and not commercial fishing. But there are some local fishing related businesses that are concerned about how these regulations affect them. Can you speak to your understanding of that impact?
Absolutely. And, I will say we appreciate, understand, and recognize the economic impacts and the socioeconomic impacts to watermen and businesses who rely on this fishery for their livelihood. We absolutely, recognize the gravity of that. and we take our responsibility to prioritize and protect not only the natural resources, but our socioeconomic responsibilities as well that are related to the natural resource. So finding that balance can be increasingly challenging, especially as we're looking at a declining stock and a stock that is having struggling to reproduce. So, mortality is up, reproduction is down. It's a bad combination. And so I will say specifically to the trophy season, just the trophy season itself, recognizing that the target there was the 35-inch fish and higher. I believe there was strong consensus from our Sport Fishery Advisory Committee, made up of stakeholders from the industry, as well as other partners, that really was a high risk and unnecessary. And so doing away with that part of it, fish of that size, seemed to be well received. In terms of the 2 weeks of closure to catch and release, certainly we recognize that means, charter boats and other recreational fishing trips will be off limits for those 2 weeks, and that is, revenue that is missed. If we were not at this critical juncture in terms of the population and the data that we're seeing, we would not necessarily need to take such a strident action. But we feel strongly that to give this population of fish the best possible chance for rebounding and rebuilding, so that we're not in the same place next year and 2 years from now, but we can actually start to see the curve increase, it's imperative that we take this action this year.
Thank you so much, Ms. Fidler. I see Senator Mouts and I see Senator Jacobs, so I'll have Senator Mouts ask his question. And Senator Jacob, this is a question, and then next you'll be able to have your people, you and your people talk. So, Senator Mouts.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I apologize. I've got a little parliamentary question first. So we're going to do witnesses and then ask questions after witnesses provide testimony throughout the hearing. Is that the process?
Yeah, so this section is sort of this part is a clarification of what the regulation is, right? What the agency's intent was. And then because there is a concern about it, and we, as Delegate Rosenberg said, we have to approve or not approve emergency regulations, which we can do after this, which we must do. We must decide whether to approve or not approve. So, but we're getting additional information on this.
Thank you for clarifying that for me. And Mrs. Fidler, great to be with you. Thank you this morning for your testimony. I was interested, I was going through the documents, and we're talking about the stock of the striped bass. What is, have you modeled what the impact of this regulation will have, and what will be its benefit to the stock of striped bass?
That is an excellent question, Senator Maltz. I appreciate that. I know that that type of analysis has taken place as it related to some larger coastwide measures that were being explored. So I am going to defer to my fisheries director, Lynn Fagley, to elaborate on specifically these closures, and if we have a synthesis on what the correlating benefit for this closure would look like.
Yeah, I'll go a little further. I had another
Okay.
that because going through the data, I was reading the DLS report talking about harvest, and it was showing that 90% of the harvest is from the recreational side, and then 10% was from the commercial side. And so I was interested how that blends in with whatever modeling was performed to try to derive a best impact of, improve the stock measurement based off of the numbers that DNR is utilizing in this Young of the Year survey.
Yes, good questions. Lynn, are you able to?
Unfortunately, I think we have lost her unless
Oh, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Okay. We can hear you, Lynn. Yep.
Yeah, I'm a little wobbly, but I think just wave if you can't hear me. So first, I'll take that sort of backwards, Senator Mouts. So to your question about the composition of the mortality, as a coast, the commercial fishery is about 10% of the total mortality. In the Chesapeake, it's about 30 to 35%. And recreational release mortality in Chesapeake Bay in 2022 was about 21% of the total harvest. So there's a distinction there that on the coast, the recreational release mortality has been increasing, but in the bay, it's actually been decreasing. So I wanted to start there. So the goal for every state along the coast is to do their best to lower mortality of all sources, whether it be recreational harvest, recreational release mortality, or commercial. We want to get all of that mortality down. As you know, we did close catch and release for the month of April, and we did determine that there was, the number was low, quite honestly. We did calculate a % reduction in mortality for the April closure. It was under 5%, I believe, without looking at the numbers. I will say that calculating the impacts of catch and release fishing on the stock is incredibly difficult given the data that we have. So for these 2 weeks in May, we do not have a specific reduction in recreational release mortality for the Chesapeake. So this action is really meant to offer additional protection and safe passage as these fish complete their spawning run. It is an action we're taking in an abundance of caution. We all know that with fish, there is not a one-to-one relationship between the number of spawners and the subsequent number of young. We need to have environmental conditions that are just right in order to get a good year class. So the idea here is to up the ante, to increase the odds and make everything as right as possible for our spawners so that when environmental conditions align, we can get a good year class. So the direct answer to your question is for these 2 weeks in May and the catch and release closure, we do not have a precise calculation of the decrease in mortality.
Okay, so there is not a projected impact based off of this regulation. And it's interesting because you were talking about the coastal versus the bay. And I remember a few years ago, it used to be modeled differently where we had a bay review and then we had a coastal review, and then we grouped all the striped bass into one management pool. But I appreciate that answer. The survey, the Young of the Year survey, has that conducted? That's our gold standard for assessing the stock of striped bass. Is that correct?
It is. So yes, it is. However, I want to be really clear that, so the juvenile survey has been conducted since the mid 1950s. It is a very powerful survey. I understand that there are concerns about shifts in, shifts in fish distribution relative to where we sample. I want to address that by letting everybody know that while the JI does give us a very strong signal of reproductive success, the DNR is on the water almost 12 months a year monitoring the striped bass population. And throughout the year, every time we go out, we collect samples that allow us to understand the ages of the fish in the sample. And what this means is that when we see a strong year class in the juvenile survey, we see it clear as day in our subsequent samples. So the 2015 year class, for example, we can watch that go through our data because we see them appear as 1-year-olds, 2-year-olds, 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds as we move through time. And so that what that means is if that, and we also see the same, by the way, for week year classes. We also would see if we missed a strong signal, 2 years ago, we would suddenly see an abundance of age 2s in a subsequent sample. The striped bass, while the JI is a very important indicator of reproductive success, it is in the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Management Plan as a trigger for stock health. However, the stock is assessed using extensive information from all the states, from Maine to North Carolina. It also includes juvenile surveys from the Commonwealth of Virginia. So that it's not a standalone. We work really hard as a scientific community to cross-check and validate the signals that we're seeing.
Thank you. So you pretty much answered my question. The first one was, what is the effect going to be? And we don't know. That's the number one answer. The number two question was, is this the gold standard? And I believe the answer was, it is for Maryland. However, there are a number of other measures for the stock, not just that young of year survey. And then I was also interested, as far as like the ecological impact. We have some other closures in the season. I know it was just released or extended in the summertime. I know that's not part of this regulation, but and I don't want to ask a question on a Friday morning outside the germaneness of this hearing. But these closures for any catch and release, are they attached to a mortality expectation or a stock expectation? Or are those, what is the standard the department? Better yet, let me ask, I apologize. Is there a fisheries management plan in place that governs these decisions?
Yes, absolutely. And I believe you're speaking about, there's a closure for 2 weeks in July, and we are scoping, just putting out, testing the water, so to speak, and getting feedback on like adding 1 week into August to that closure. And that is related again to the likelihood, the higher risk of mortality from interacting and interfering with those fish when the temperatures are so high in the last 2 weeks of July and moving into August. So that's been in place for some time, the July closure, and we're scoping the 1 week in August for comment and input. But absolutely, we have a Maryland specific fisheries management plan. And then we also work in cooperation with the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission, again, because these are migratory species that are, their behavior and activity up and down the coast, it's all connected.
I think, Senator Mouse, I think I also heard in your question, I guess we should say, if you don't do this, Ms. Fiddler, what will will there be fewer bass to fish next year? I mean, I think, do we know that?
Yeah.
I think that's some of what.
Sure. Yeah, I think the data that we see and the science that tells us about the fishing effort and what is happening to the fish. And Lynn spoke to this a bit about the stress and the, oxygen levels and things. So July and August, they're not.
Try to.
Sure. Yeah, and to finish off on my questions, because this does have an enormous economic impact throughout our district in that fisheries management plan, and we're looking at these different things. Are you accounting for the changes in the water temperature, and most importantly, these point source pollutions where you've got the raw sewage going into bay and things like that? How is that accounted for in all this analysis? Because I mean, the impact is being felt in small families and small businesses, marinas. people in many different ways and downstream also. And taking those things into consideration with these management plans and these decisions, how is pollution and the reality of what's really happening in the bay incorporated in the decisions that are being made?
Great question. I would say yes, given the 7 various annual surveys and analysis that are conducted in addition to the juvenile index, we are in multiple locations of the bay, various water qualities, different, point, non-point source impacts, health of SAV, and what have you are all, considered in that big picture that we receive from the scope of the 7+ surveys that we do each year throughout the year. And so it tells us a lot. It tells us a lot. And we're doing studies on impacts of warmer waters and climate change. And over the last few years, we've had really warm winters. And so lack of snow, lack of rain in the spring, all of that has an impact that impacts a different spot sort of in the timeline of the spawning success and then the larval success. And so you heard me mention the zooplankton. That's what the little tiny babies eat as soon as they're born. If that zooplankton and those other microscopic organisms are not there because of a really dry, warm winter, then the success of that juvenile class is going to be poor. So there's a lot of data points that are informing the overall management strategy. And I will say that our agency's understanding of what these changes are and what they mean is a top priority for this administration and under the leadership of Secretary Kurtz. And we are eager to refine and build upon the data that we have. And that means, extending or starting our GillNet survey earlier into March to get a better understanding of spawning activity or pre-spawn activity. We're also really eager to continue to partner and build on the partnerships with UMSEs and other local institutions. They have expertise in zooplankton and other elements of this patchwork that makes up the overall management strategy. So yes, I believe that is all taken into consideration.
You're correct, Senator Mass. I will just again, recognizing again, it's Friday, we have to hear from other people. You all are going into an area that's outside, it impacts, but just to get a little bit. So if you have a specific on the regulation, or I will.
No, thank you, Madam Chair. In fact, I was going to wrap it up and thank all the members for their patience with my questions. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Just in case. All right. Delegate Jacobs, you just might as well just get, if you have a question, but then just go right into you.
Well, I would like to ask a question of DNR based on their presentation, if you don't mind.
Oh, absolutely.
Madam Chair, and then I'll get into the other thing. So, Kristen, I appreciate your presentation this morning. We have Lynn and Mike on there, and perhaps one of you or all of you can answer this, but I think the goal of all this is really to protect the spawning females, to give them a better opportunity to get to spawning areas and certainly to increase the juvenile index. But in this proposed regulation, when you talk about especially, I guess it's number 1 on your list, extend April closure, there's nothing changed on the no target begin date from where it's been since 2020. Is that correct?
I believe that is correct.
So the catch and release portion of the fishery has not been affected in any way by this proposed regulation.
Catch and release is impacted in the first 2 weeks of May in the bay. They are closed down, and then in the Susquehanna Flats.
Yeah, you're right. I'm sorry, but that's correct. That they would be impacted by the regular season that would have opened for the charter boats and recreational for the trophy season, which has been closed in this. But my question is, and what would like clarification on is that all this action, which has been, has a huge economic effect. We all know that. But the goal here is to protect the spawning females to ultimately produce a better juvenile index.
Yes.
What I wanted to clarify was the fact that we've been having the no target date begin on April 1st since 2020. So nothing has changed as far as targeting the catch and release portion of your new proposed regulation. Is that correct?
If I'm understanding you correctly, and I'll let Lynn chime in, are you getting at the fact that they can be catching and releasing prior to April and we haven't changed that?
That's correct.
Okay, so kind of getting at the March activity.
Well, that March activity certainly is very concerning, but I just want to, for everyone on here that's paying attention, I want them to understand that nothing has changed prior to April 1st, where it has been for at least since 2020.
Lynn, I just want to make sure I'm not misleading. I believe that's accurate. Can you confirm?
Yes, that's accurate. So,
Okay.
but I do want to remind everybody so that several years ago, we did put in place, beginning in March 1st, gear restrictions to mitigate harm of catch and release. So I think everybody remembers that. It was pretty controversial. So we prohibited stinger hooks, we prohibited bait, we limited the number of lines allowed on a boat. We also do, beginning March 1st, close to any catch and release or harassment of striped bass, the spawning areas. So there are protections in place in March. This and none of that has changed. You are absolutely correct, Delegate Jacobs. I do want to also, sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm the point I'm trying to make here, we've made some major changes with this regulation as far as the fishery goes, for the purpose, again, of protecting the spawning females. But I just want everyone to understand again that nothing has changed on the period prior to April 1st. This what has been in place since 2020.
If I may, this is Delegate Rosenberg. Ms. Fiddler, could you stop sharing your screen?
Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you.
You
There
got
you
it.
There she is.
Hi. One thing I wanted to add, just Delegate Jacobs, the regulations that Ms. Fegley just mentioned with the stinger hooks and the prohibited the use of bait at certain times in March. There's about five protections that were passed, and I believe that was in 2010. So we have had protections related to catch and release, pretty extensive regulations. I will say, we believe that we need to get a better understanding of, whether those protections go far enough. And so we're looking at that and how to assess that. And we're also, like we've talked about before, looking at starting that gillnet survey earlier than April 1st, moving it into mid-March to get a better handle on, how are all of these impacts really working together, impacts and effects of warming waters and, spawning fish coming up earlier to the tributaries potentially.
Ms.
Okay,
Fiddler,
I think
I just have a clarifying question just on yours. Are you saying, Ms. Fiddler, that we can expect additional more comprehensive additional regulations on a broader set of measures, some that Senator Mounts mentioned, some of the things that Senator Delegate Jacobs are alluding to, that you're doing some evaluation, we should expect some
potentially. What I was just speaking of was more increased and expanded studies, research, and surveys to get a better understanding of whether those measures need to be refined, updated, changed in any way. But as today's regulations are emergency and would only impact this 2024 season, yes, there would be a more comprehensive package before you as a regular rulemaking process, should we want to memorialize these changes and or add anything else.
Thank you. Sorry, Delegate Jacob. I just wanted to clarify that so people didn't start thinking of other things.
That's fine, Senator Washington. I just, once again, I want to make sure we're clear, and then I'll move on. But in all the proposed regulations, there's been no change prior the catch and release season. There's been no change prior to the April 1st closure that would be in effect now since 2020. So there's been no change to the catch and release portion of the fishery. That's what I want to make sure of.
Yes, correct.
Thank you. That's pretty simple. And I thank you for that. I just want everybody to understand there has been no impact or no change on the catch and release season.
No, and Delegate, you're a member of this committee, and so you were able to say what you need to say, as well as Senator Mounts. And so I'm happy to start the, I guess, hearing portion.
All right.
Brief.
If there's no further questions of DNR, and I appreciate everyone being on this morning, answering questions from the department. So, good morning, co-chairs and members of AELR committee. This morning, I want to explain the reason I requested this hold and public hearing for the regulation 23-312. In November 2023, the Department of Natural Resources submitted a proposed regulation that repeals the 2024 recreational and charter boat spring trophy season for striped bass and repeals the recreational and charter boat early summer and fall season for striped bass in the Susquehanna Flats, the Susquehanna River, Northeast River, all those areas from May 16, 2024 inclusive, and extends the period through which a person is prohibited from targeting striped bass hybrids in the bay and its tributaries during the 2024 season. The reason for this action is to reduce the mortality on the striped bass stock biomass. Maryland typically has its greatest access to the striped bass spawning stock during the spring spawning season. This is an especially sensitive period for spawning striped bass, which we're dependent on a number of environmental conditions to have a successful spawn. Due to declines in the spawning stock biomass and poor recruitment of juvenile fish over the last 5 years, actions have been taken both at the state level and the coast to reduce mortality in those fish. With the winters becoming warmer for the last several years, which causes water temperatures to be warmer, the spawning females are heading to the spawning grounds earlier than past migrations. Since spawning activity is temperature driven, there is evidence that these spawning females are heading to the spawning area sooner than normal. The Chesapeake Bay and its tributaries are the primary spawning and nursery area for 70 to 90% of the entire Atlantic coast stocks of striped bass. According to DNR's fishery goals, as far as recruitment goes, the goal is to protect spawning females and to avoid increased interference with spawning behavior and mortality. Very important statement there. With the closure of trophy season in the Susquehanna areas, who knows how many anglers will turn their attention to the catch and release season, which is open prior to April 1st closure. There are pictures virtually every day on social media with people holding up 30, 40, 50-inch striped bass for a photo as if it were a trophy. The fact is these fish are not supposed to be removed from the water. And that leads to a much higher chance of mortality. All this being said, my ask for this hearing is simple: for the good of the spawning females, that the no target date be moved from April 1st to March 1st to give these fish a clear path to the spawning grounds to hopefully have a very successful spawn and ultimately improve the juvenile stock in Maryland to ensure a more and robust fishery in the future. Amen.
Okay, thank you. Did you have two other people that you had with you to make
Well, Senator Washington, Madam Co-Chair, it's been a little bit of a mess here getting people signed up. There were two people that I submitted myself because they said they didn't have to go through MGA. And then I think there were three others that registered through MGA. So it should be a total of 5, I would say, that I'm aware of on the proponent side.
All right, do you see them on this, and we are, I guess, staff, do you have the people and can you tell us who they are? Unfortunately, the chat function is disabled on here, so I'm not able to get the type of.
Madam Chair, I have Mr. Tim Mortis
Okay.
and Captain Rob Newberry in the waiting room. I will let them in now.
Okay, bring them in. You don't have to keep them in the waiting list, so, all right. All right, I think I see Captain Tim Newberry.
Updated, changed in any way, but as today's regulations are emergency and would only impact.
Did you mute that? Thank you. All right. I am looking for Captain Tim. Maybe you should unmute. Timothy Mortis, is that it?
Yes, I'm here.
Are you here to speak in support of the regulation?
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, we'd love to hear from you.
Are we ready?
I'm ready. We are all ready. You have the full committee listening to what you have to say.
Hi. Hello, everyone. My name is Tim Mortis. I'm second vice president, Maryland Watermen's Association. Our group is in favor of this. Things are changing, whether it be, climate, predatory risk. We would just like to see these fish left alone a little while longer to get a chance to lay their eggs, without having risk of being caught, risk of dying, anything like that. We're already doing this from April on. What's a few more days to save a few more fish is kind of the way we're looking at it. And I'd like to thank everyone for listening and Jay for putting this bill together. Thank you.
Mary, you're muted.
If there's another person, I thank you, Captain, for sharing with us. There's another person here to testify in support. I would assume you can see them, delegate. You can help me. I'm not able to. My screen is not big enough to see everyone. Can staff let me
There,
know?
Mr. Hardman,
Captain Newberry.
Captain Newberry. Thank you. Captain?
Yes, I'm here. I'm sorry I can't get on the video. If I do that, my bandwidth goes south. So can you all hear me?
Yes,
Yes,
we can
sir.
see you. Yes.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. And hello to all the committee. My name is Captain Robert Newberry. I'm chairman of Delmarva Fisheries Association. I do applaud the Department of Natural Resources for making these efforts to protect the spawning females. But there are several issues that need to be addressed. If they are to protect the spawning females, we do agree that and do support what they have done, but it needs to go a little bit farther. As it stands right now, we can catch and release these fish during a closed season. And I emphasize the word and ask to look up the definition according to the state of a closed season. Well, these fish, when they come up in the bay, this year especially, from December 15th until the current day, and I've never seen this in 50 years of working on the water and being on the bay. Today, as a matter of fact, this morning, 8 boats left Oxford to go catch and release these fish. This has been an epic proportions. These conservation groups have said many times that the fishery has gone in the tank, that there's no fish in the bay, and then all of a sudden it's all over Facebook. They got 40, 50-pound fish sitting on their laps. It's great. Come get them, come catch them. If the state of Maryland is going to protect the spawning stock biomass of gravid or egg producing females, there needs to be an absolute closure. And I do move forward. I'm in favor of this with the amendment to bring in the month of March. If they want to save 20% of the stock prior to the season that have already spawned, these fish are pre-spawned and they are staging to spawn as we speak. The striped bass spawn in waters from 52 to 60 degrees. The bay today is 42 degrees. So we've got 10 degrees of increase. Is that going to happen? Well, they're calling, but the groundhog said we're going to have an early spring. So, you know, Mother Nature is going to give it to us. So what I would recommend to this commission is, yes, approve the bill and the amendment that Senator Jake or Delegate Jacobs has put in, and move forward to be more restrictive and bring in a complete closure, including the month of March, of no targeting, no catch and release of these striped bass. If we're going to protect them, let's do the right thing and be the proper management of the hatchery. Thank you very much.
And thank you so much. Again, just to clarify, there is a separation between the legislature and the executive and agency. We are not able to amend, so we do accept the recommendation to adopt for Delegate Jacob. Any additional restrictions that would have to either be in the context of law or in an additional permanent regulation that
Correct.
the agency would promulgate. But we thank you for that and appreciate your insight.
Could I add one thing more, Senator? It'd be only a few seconds.
Absolutely.
In the statement that was made, and the question by Delegate or Senator Mounts, if the pollution and water temperature and predation is affecting in the young of the year that DNR does, they said it is, but this is on record now. At the ASMFC meeting, I specifically asked the department and ASMFC if the pollution from Baltimore, the problem with the Conowingo Dam, and predation is a factor in correlating these numbers with the spawning stock biomass and the young of the year, and the answer to that was no. That's on record. If you want me to send you the video, I'll send you the video. The answer was no, but now they're saying yes. I'm calling foul, so thank you very much.
Thank you, and certainly maybe the committees of jurisdiction can follow up on that. Thank you. Ms. Fidler, is your response to that? It's not necessary, but
I can keep it very quick.
all right. Thank you.
I just wanted to clarify, and I do not, my intention was not to contradict what was stated at ASMFC. My point was that the data collection that the department does is comprehensive. And so we are looking at a multitude of factors. I did not say, or I did not mean to say, that the pollution from Baltimore or Conowingo is impacting the success of the reproduction or a specific indicator of a poor juvenile index. So I just wanted to clarify my statement on this record.
And that's fair, and you have a right to do that.
Thank
All
you.
right. Thank you.
Senator, I hate to interrupt, but I've got committee hearings that are starting a minute ago, and I've got 2 bills on the list. So can I give my proxy to someone?
Well, we
we're
can-
not voting we don't need to vote today. We will
Okay.
poll on this. We can poll on this. There's the option to poll on this.
Great. So I'm going to have to leave. It's been very interesting.
Madam Chair, I would suggest we can take if there's a motion. we
There
can
is an
vote
amendment.
now.
It's not required under code for us to do that today. We don't have to do it today. So, and if you do it, we can do it by poll. It doesn't have to this way. We could hear by so do we have others here testifying? Staff, do we have people that are in opposition to the regulation?
None of the other
Are here?
the other people that signed up are here.
Okay, with that, so under code, I have Senator Muse and Senator Delegate Hughes. So I'll go with Delegate Sample Hughes first, and then Senator Hughes.
Oh, sure. Thank you. Good morning, Senator, and all that have convened. I just needed a clarity on the amendment part. I know that this body is not able to entertain the amendment, but I just need to know for procedural purposes, how does that get addressed?
We can't. It would.
Right. I know that, but I'm saying for the average citizen wants to understand, the gentleman that just testified said, yes, we're in favor of it, but we have an amendment. How should they, at some point, if that is still their position, go about doing anything at all? I just want to make sure we have clarity for the public.
Right, so any member of the, if they wish to take immediate action on that, any member of the General Assembly certainly can draft legislation and codify that. The other option is that as DNR is considering its long-term, its permanent regulations, they could consider adopting that as a part of their permanent regulations.
Okay, thank you very much.
I appreciate that. It's important for the public to know that there was.
Yeah, because not to interrupt you, but it's one thing for us to be aware of the policies and procedures, but when I was receiving emails and phone calls, that was the thought process that they could amend in this process, but I made it clear they could not. Just wanted to make sure we had clarity as we move forward. Thank you.
Yeah, Senator Hughes.
Yes, thank you very much, and good morning to all. I too have hearings and voting JPR, and when my chair got off, that was my indication I need to go. Very interesting meeting. Anything I can do, let me know. Morning to all.
We'll be voting on this. Yes. Delegate Jacobs.
Madam Co-Chair, I have people that were signed up, that pre-signed, Brian Hartman, and I submitted also Jason Seaman. Brian Hartman, he can't get on. He keeps trying and they won't let him log in. He was on the list.
Right.
He's been on the YouTube part, but he can't get logged in. And it's very important testimony.
We
He
will
pre-registered.
allow him to speak. Yes.
He's having trouble getting logged in. I mean, can Kelvin or somebody help him? I think his phone number is also on the app.
Mr. Hartman was in the waiting room earlier. I don't know why it dropped off. I recommended to someone to have him log back in. I guess he's not been able to.
Yeah, he's having trouble getting logged in.
And the other person that you recommended.
Can you have him call the number so that at least we can hear him?
All right.
Recommend that he try to use his phone. Is there anybody else that's here that it's important for us to hear? So Kelvin, is there anyone else?
There's another person in the waiting room, and maybe Delegate Jacobs could provide some clarity here. Jason,
you just let people who are in the waiting room in. I mean, if we were in a hearing, they would be sitting in the, so just let them in.
Here goes.
Thank you.
His name was submitted also.
Yeah, not a problem. So at the moment, we don't know if this person is is in support or in opposition, but whichever position they are, we will allow them their 3 minutes. Okay. Hello, who is NYL? You were just in the waiting room, and now you're in our meeting with the committee. Can we know who you are, and are you here to provide testimony on regulation? Okay, all right then.
Madam Chair, it's unfortunate because these people all signed up in plenty of time, and we're just having all kind of technical difficulties. My phone's lighting up because they can't get in.
It's the first time we've done it like this, and
well, it's very important testimony, and I wish that that would be considered in this important issue.
Is the person able to call, and you can try? I mean, we do have committee meetings and we have some things, so we do need to close it, get to the end of this hearing.
You
I
also
see
know if they
Brian
could submit
Hardman.
written testimony?
Okay, is Brian Hardman the call? Or is it
Give me the phone number.
we do have, okay,
We see you, Brian.
Hey, there you are.
Yeah, we see you and hear you.
we see you and hear you. Thank you, Mr. Hardman.
Written testimony?
Okay, is Brian Hardman the call? Or is it
Yes, I'm here. That's the phone number.
Silence the person who is NYL. Okay, super.
We see you, Brian.
Can I go ahead and talk?
Yeah, we see you and hear you.
We see you and hear you. Thank you, Mr. Hardman.
Can I go ahead?
Yes, yeah, just give us 1 second. Thank you, staff. Okay, yes, Mr. Brian, Mr. Hardman, thank you for joining us. You have 3 minutes.
See you, Brian.
Can I go ahead and talk?
Yeah, we see you and hear you.
We see you and hear you. Thank you.
Can I go ahead?
Brian, I think you have another feed playing that you'll need to disconnect before you can testify. So if you have it on your phone, or if you have something else, you'll need to turn that off, but we can see you and hear you. I think you have your YouTube still open. So close out of YouTube if you can, please. Before you can testify. So if you have it on your phone, or if you have something else, you'll need to turn that off, but we can see you and hear you.
Hold on, close it out.
I think you have your YouTube still open. So close out of YouTube if you can, please. Before you can testify. So if you have it on
Is that better?
or if you have something else, you'll need to turn that off.
Bill?
You and hear you.
Hold on, close it out.
If you have your YouTube still open, so close out of YouTube if you can, please. Before you can testify. So if you have it.
Is that better?
Or if you have something else, you'll need to turn that off.
Okay, so you need to turn off all, so you probably have a bunch of windows open. So if you just close all of your windows on your laptop except for the one that you're using to speak to us, then he closed himself out. Okay. All right. Thank you, Sally, for trying to help with that. Delegate Jacobs, try to get him back on. Kelvin, do we have anybody else? I see a Baker. I don't know. Are they here?
That's Jeremy Baker.
Oh, okay.
There is no one else in the waiting room who signed up to testify.
All right. Let's give this a couple more minutes to get them on. And we will. Oh,
Madam Chair, I believe there are a few hands raised from Delegate Mel.
just noticed, Delegate McComas.
To the chairs of AELR, I was just wondering if it's possible if we could make a motion to continue this when it's when we don't have folks that have committee, and because this is important. Susquehanna Flats is in Harford County. I'm certainly understanding that this is going to have a tremendous impact on the folks that are fishermen and everything, and I think we want to be fair to everybody, and it's important we get both sides of the story. So I was just wondering if we're having so much trouble and we've lost two of the folks that are on the Senate JPR, and that's very important. I just would like to see if we could possibly, plus I've got a call right this second, but possibly if we could continue this. So that's just a thought. Thank you.
Are you making a motion to table this and to continue it at another time?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Yes.
Second to that motion?
Second.
Okay.
If I may, could I just ask staff how much notice has to be given to the public? So what are our options? And I'm not opposing the tabling motion.
Oh, you're right.
But what are our when could the next meeting be held? Staff.
Statute says when a member calls for a hearing that the hearing must take place in a reasonable amount of time.
Yes, we're very flexible. Again, this is not a traditional hearing. We don't have any of the obligations. Yes, Sally.
I believe that you all could, it would just be schedule permitting. So perhaps as early as Monday,
Yeah.
sometime next week.
Yep.
Monday's good.
Okay. All right. So I hear there's a motion. Who accepts the motion? Raise your hands. Is anybody opposed? Okay, so this meeting will be continued. The motion is tabled. Thank you all so much for your insights and help, and we will see you next week. We'll continue this topic.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you for the consideration since we had such a mess this morning.
No,
Thank you.
That's Robert's rules for you. It'll help. Okay.
Thanks again.